This is Plant-Based Briefing, a history of the anti-vivisection movement from Animal-Free Science Advocacy at animalfreescienceadvocacy.org.au. And I'm Marian Erickson. This is the curated content plant-based podcast where I narrate articles on plant-based and vegan topics with permission in about 10 minutes or less every weekday. And last week I was thrilled to receive an email from Rachel Smith at Animal-Free Science Advocacy in Australia. And she mentioned that she's been listening and noted some content on the use of animals in experiments, and should I wish to use any of their material from AFSA, that I'd be most welcome. They are an Australian not-for-profit organization advocating for the replacement of animals in research and teaching, and their content includes their website, they have a podcast, they have bulletins or briefings about various topics, lots of great information. They were formerly known as Humane Research Australia, so some of the content is under that name and branding, but they have so much amazing content and they do such important work. And it's kind of funny because the day I read this email, I had just been thinking about Laika, the poor stray dog who was sent to space, the first living being launched into Earth's orbit in November 1957. The story is just so disturbing, and it came to mind, as it often does, just looking at my dogs, and I thought, what we do to others, defenseless, innocent others, is just unforgivable. She actually survived only about 5 to 7 hours after liftoff before dying of overheating and panic. And this is from the Encyclopedia Britannica online. And this is one of those things that I wish I never knew about because it's so disturbing to think about. And then I opened this email from Rachel and her amazing organization, people working so hard to ensure that others are not put in these ridiculous, horrible situations. So I thought it was interesting to learn about the history of the movement behind her organization and many others like it. So now let's get to today's plant-based briefing. The history of the anti-vivisection movement from Animal-Free Science Advocacy at animalfreescienceadvocacy.org.au. A brief history of the movement from the 1800s. This page is dedicated to those activists upon whose shoulders we stand. It provides a brief history of the anti-vivisection movement from the 1800s, the prominent campaigns and campaigners. We hope this is a useful resource for those interested in the history of the movement. There's a common misconception that the anti-vivisection movement is a modern one. However, it originated in 19th century England when vivisection was highly debated. The anti-vivisection movement in the period 1860 to 1910 was one of the strongest debates of the time. The early anti-vivisection movement was led by women, many of whom were also prominent feminists and women's rights activists. Here we feature some of the activists. Anna Kingsford. Anna Kingsford was an English feminist, vegetarian, and anti-vivisection activist. In order to support her anti-vivisection activism, Anna Kingsford studied medicine. After passing her first examination in London in 1872, she continued her education in Paris. During classes, she protested when vivisection would take place. Often the only woman in her class, she endured further persecution for her animal rights activism, yet continued to take a stand. At the age of 33 in 1880, she graduated and was the first English woman to receive a degree in medicine. However, as a woman, she was not permitted to practice as a doctor. She devoted the rest of her life to writing and speaking on behalf of animals. She died at the age of 41 in 1888. It was 4 years after her death in 1892, the British Medical Association finally accepted female doctors, a remarkable woman ahead of her time. Frances Power Cobbe. Frances Power Cobbe was an Irish writer, social reformer, and leader in the women's rights and anti-vivisection movements. She was a leading suffragette. In 1875, she founded the world's first organization dedicated to campaigning against vivisection, the National Anti-Vivisection Society, and in 1898, the British Union for the Abolition of Vivisection, which today continues its work and is now known as Cruelty-Free International. Frances Power Cobbe was instrumental in drafting the Cruelty to Animals Act in 1876. In 1884, she retired to Wales, and at the age of 82, she died of heart failure at her home in 1904. Louise or Lizzie Lind af Hageby and Lisa Catherine Schartau. Lind af Hageby and Schartau were two Swedish feminists and animal rights activists who founded the Anti-Vivisection Society of Sweden. Lind af Hageby also lectured on the white slave trade, prison reform, and social reform. In 1902, in order to gain medical training to support their campaigning, both women enrolled at the London School of Medicine for Women, a vivisection-free college that had visiting arrangements with other colleges. Here they infiltrated the male-dominated medical fraternity. They attended hundreds of lectures and demonstrations at King's and University College, including experiments on live animals. In 1903, the women attended a lecture conducted by Ernest Starling and William Bayliss, where they witnessed the vivisection of an unanesthetized dog in front of some 60 medical students. This same dog was used in multiple procedures over the course of a few months, and soon after the dog was killed. This dog was first used in vivisection in December 1902 by Starling, who cut open the dog's abdomen and ligated the pancreatic duct. For the next 2 months, the dog lived in a cage until Starling and Bayliss used him again for 2 procedures on February 2, 1903, the day Lind and Schartau were present. The women alleged that Bayliss illegally dissected the dog while it was awake. Stephen Coleridge, a lawyer opposed to animal experiments, was horrified by the account and made a public accusation that Bayliss had broken the law and tortured the dog. However, Bayliss sued Coleridge for defamation, and a jury found Coleridge guilty of defamation and ordered him pay Bayliss damages and legal fees. Animal rights campaigners were outraged at the trial's result and raised money to have a bronze statue of the dog erected in Battersea, London, in 1906. Below the statue was an inscription reading, "In memory of the brown terrier dog done to death in the laboratories of University College in February 1903, after having endured vivisection extending over more than 2 months, and having been handed over from one vivisector to another till death came to his release. Men and women of England, how long shall these things be?" Medical students were angered by its provocative words, leading to frequent vandalism of the statue and requiring 24-hour police guard. On the 10th of December 1907, fury was transformed into action, with 1,000 medical students marching through central London, waving effigies of the brown dog, clashing with suffragettes, trade unionists, and 400 police officers in one of a series of battles known as the Brown Dog Riots. Sporadic violence continued after this, with students disrupting meetings organized by Lizzie Lind of Hageby. Trade unionists, socialists, and women's activists fought battles with students in the vicinity of the Brown Dog Memorial to prevent its destruction. However, in March 1910, Battersea Council sent 4 workers accompanied by 120 police officers to remove the statue under cover of darkness. It was reportedly melted down by the council's blacksmith, despite a 20,000-strong petition in its favor. There was significant opposition to vivisection in England in both Houses of Parliament during the reign of Queen Victoria, 1837 to 1901. The Queen herself was strongly opposed to it, as were writers George Bernard Shaw and Mark Twain. Vivisected Jack. Another hapless dog to make history in the anti-vivisection movement was an Irish Terrier who became known as Vivisected Jack. In 1913, after disappearing for 6 weeks, Jack returned walking on 3 legs with a collar bearing the words "Surgical Department." The story can be found linked here. In Melbourne in 1922, a branch of the British Union Against Vivisection, or BUAV, was established with Miss Helena McDougall being appointed as the first secretary. In the 1930s, other branches of the BUAV were established around Australia, notably in Western Australia and Tasmania. Indeed, it was not unusual during the 1930s for government ministers to be anti-vivisectionists. It had been noted that every British cabinet at the time had included a strong minority of uncompromising anti-vivisectionists. In 1979, the Australian Association for Humane Research was established by Ms. Elizabeth Alston in Sydney. After over 25 years of undoubted commitment and dedication to the cause, Ms. Alston decided it was time to move on, and HRA was handed over to a new management committee and relocated to Melbourne. From this point, HRA was led by Helen Marston, who retired in early 2020 and sadly passed away in 2021, and HRA then became Animal Free Science Advocacy in October 2023. You just listened to The History of the Anti-Vivisection Movement from animalfreescienceadvocacy.org.au, and I'm your host, Marian Erickson. How about these strong women? Wow. Amazing. So please share this episode with anyone who might benefit, and thanks for listening.